Hey guys! Tonight we're heading high into the Peruvian Andes, to a windswept plateau where the air tastes like cold stone and thin clouds snag on jagged peaks. The ground is a patchwork of yellowed grass and scattered rock, and just when you think it's all going to be more of the same, you see it. An immense wall of precisely fitted stones rising out of the earth like the spine of some ancient creature that decided to take a nap for a few thousand years. It doesn't just look old, it looks impossible. The stones meet so perfectly that even the mountain wind seems embarrassed to try and squeeze between them. You probably won't survive trying to replicate it with a tape measure and a chisel in your garage, but don't let me stop you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk toward it, boots crunching on gravel, the wind snapping at your jacket. The closer you get, the more your sense of scale starts to wobble. At first, you thought the blocks were the size of suitcases. Now you realize some are taller than you. Their surfaces are weathered, edges rounded just enough to soften the bite of their precision, but the seams between them are tight enough to keep secrets. A mainstream fact, Peru is home to numerous Inca and pre-Inca stoneworks, like the famous walls of Sacsayhuaman, where massive blocks were shaped and set without mortar, relying solely on masterful stone fitting to hold them in place for centuries. You put your hand against one block. It's cool, dry, faintly gritty. The surface dips in shallow curves, almost like it was sculpted to fit your palm. A quirky tidbit you've heard whispers about. Some fringe theories claim these stones were softened using lost plant-based chemistry, molded into place before hardening again. It's an alluring idea, though historians still argue whether that's practical science or just a romantic shortcut to explaining away human skill. Above you, the wall looms against a backdrop of snow-dusted peaks. The wind rushes over it in a low hiss, as though the structure itself is part of the mountain's breath. You notice tiny patches of lichen clinging to the higher stones, little bursts of green and gold in an otherwise gray puzzle. You imagine ancient masons watching their work take shape, fitting each irregular piece into the whole with the care of someone composing a poem in stone. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet question begins. Why here, in this exact place, did they decide to raise a wall that looks more like art than fortification? A condor passes overhead, its shadow sliding down the stones like a hand stroking the wall's surface. You take a step back for the full view, feeling both small and oddly protected, as if the wall is an old sentinel acknowledging your presence without offering any explanation. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of dust and something faintly metallic. You breathe it in and let the moment settle. The wall isn't going anywhere, and neither are your questions. You start following a narrow track that clings to the hillside, a pale ribbon of flattened earth and stone, worn smooth by centuries of feet, human, animal, and who knows what else. The path threads upward in gentle switchbacks, sometimes hugging the wall, sometimes wandering off to skirt boulders and dry gullies. Your boots scuff dust into the air, and each gust of wind whisks it away before it can settle. It's like the mountain is tidying up behind you. The further you climb, the more deliberate the trail feels. The stones underfoot are set in shallow depressions as though shaped to cradle each step, and in places they bear faint shallow grooves from countless passes. A mainstream fact slips into place. Many Inca and pre-Inca sites in Peru are connected by an extensive network of trails, some of which became part of the famous Capac Ñan, the royal road system stretching thousands of kilometers across mountains, valleys, and coasts. These roads were feats of engineering. Graded surfaces, drainage systems, retaining walls, built to last in one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. Here, though, you can't help noticing the way the path seems to be leading you not just toward the wall, but into a relationship with it. The track bends to align with sections where the masonry is most intricate, almost as if it's guiding travelers to admire specific points. You pause, where two massive stones meet in a seam so tight you could slide a credit card along it and not hear a whisper of friction. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some local guides joke that the builders were more interested in impressing the gods than the neighbors, because certain parts of these walls face sheer drops, hidden from human eyes for most of history. Historians still argue whether this was pure aesthetics, a religious statement, or some practical factor we no longer recognize. You press on. The trail narrows between an outcrop and the wall, and for a moment you feel funneled, almost like walking through a ceremonial gateway. The light changes here, less glare, more shadow, and the temperature dips enough that you tighten your jacket. The sound of the wind fades, replaced by the steady thud of your boots and the occasional clink of a loose pebble skipping downhill. Higher still, you spot carved steps chiseled directly into the bedrock, shallow, uneven, but unmistakably intentional. The risers are low, the treads long, designed for a measured, unhurried ascent. You picture ancient workers carrying tools or offerings, their pace dictated by the shape of the stone beneath them. If it were you, you'd probably complain halfway up and start lobbying for a llama shuttle service. At one bend, the wall pulls away from the path, just enough to reveal a ledge with a view that stops you cold. Below, the valley unrolls in layers, terraces like giant green staircases, a river flashing in the sun, scattered clusters of stone that might once have been homes. The wall you've been tracing looks like it's part of something bigger, a fragment of a design you can't see in full from here. You take a long breath, letting the thin air fill your lungs slowly, and glance back at the trail behind you. It snakes down the slope like a signature, every curve shaped by both the land and the hands that worked it. You're following in footsteps that stretch back farther than recorded history, and even though the wall is your destination, you realize the path itself is part of the mystery. Why was it laid this way? Who decided where to carve and where to let the mountain keep its raw face? And what did they think you'd feel, centuries later, as you climbed toward their work? The wall reappears around the next bend, its stones catching the afternoon light in a way that makes their seams vanish. For a moment, it looks like a single continuous surface, as if the mountain itself decided to grow a flawless flank. You keep walking, drawn onward, the path tightening under your feet, the questions stacking in your mind like the stones themselves, fitted with care, locked without mortar, refusing to fall apart. You close the last few meters and lay your palm flat against the wall. The stone is cool despite the sun, its texture fine-grained yet rippled in subtle, shallow waves, like someone pressed and smoothed it while it was still soft. You let your fingers wander along the seam where one massive block meets another, tracing curves and angles so precise they almost feel unnatural. The joint isn't a straight line. It zigzags, interlocks, bends, and flares, shapes that make each block unique, yet fit together with the satisfaction of puzzle pieces finally finding their match. A mainstream fact, the walls at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo are built without mortar, relying on precision-cut stones to lock together so tightly that earthquakes, common in this region, can shake the ground without toppling the structure. This seismic-resistant masonry is one of the hallmarks of Inca engineering, and it works astonishingly well. You lean closer and notice something strange. In the seam, there's no gap, no dust line, no hint of daylight sneaking through. You've seen modern masonry with grout lines thicker than your thumb. Here, the join is so perfect it might as well have been fused. A quirky tidbit you've read about pops into your head. Some fringe researchers suggest the builders may have softened or liquefied stone with an unknown chemical process, shaping it like clay before it hardened again. It's a wild theory with little hard evidence, but as you run your fingers over these undulating joins, you understand why the idea catches people's imaginations. Historians still argue whether such precision could be achieved solely with hammerstones, chisels, and endless patience, or whether we're missing some tool or method entirely. You step back to take in more of the wall. Each block has its own face, some bulging outward slightly, others recessed, the edges beveled just enough to create shadows that break up the flatness. This isn't lazy stacking, it's sculpture masquerading as architecture. Your eyes catch on one stone, shaped with a subtle curve along its base that mirrors the contour of the block beneath it. The effect is both organic and mechanical, as if the wall grew and was machined at the same time. A condor's shadow sweeps across the surface, gliding over the stones like a brushstroke. You imagine ancient masons standing where you are now, tilting their heads, making micro-adjustments until the fit was perfect, not just functionally, but aesthetically. If you tried to do this with cardboard, you'd be on your third paper cut before giving up. Your gaze travels upward. Higher courses of stone seem to step inward slightly, as though the wall is subtly leaning toward you. It's a trick of stability, an old builder's habit to counteract the pull of gravity over centuries. You picture the wall shrugging off rain, wind, and seismic shocks like a giant in no mood to be bothered. Then you spot something else, a tiny protrusion on one block, no bigger than your fist, smoothed but not carved away. It looks like a handle or a knob, but it's part of the stone itself. Were these functional for lifting and positioning the blocks? Decorative? Or just remnants of the shaping process? No one's certain. Theories range from practical lifting points to symbolic markers. You decide it's the ancient equivalent of this side up. Stepping along the base, you notice that some stones have 6, 7, even 8 sides, each facet precisely meeting its neighbor. No repeating pattern, no standard brickwork grid, just a complex geometry that makes the wall almost impossible to dismantle without destroying it. You mutter to yourself that whoever designed this was either a genius or had a serious vendetta against future renovation projects. You crouch low, pressing your ear briefly against the cool surface. The wall is silent, of course, but the stillness feels deliberate, as if it's holding on to the sound of everything it survived. When you straighten, the late light catches the edges of the seams, turning them into thin lines of gold. You reach out one last time, palm on stone, and think, this isn't just construction, it's a handshake across centuries, firm, confident, and in no rush to let go. You drift along the wall's flank and into a scatter of structures that read like footnotes to a headline. Low foundations, terraces stitched to the slope, and the ribs of long halls that once held roofs now traded for sky. The ground crunches softly. Thin grass sighs under your boots. The air carries the clean smell of rock and a ghost of wood smoke that isn't there, your brain kindly supplying the rest of the settlement from the few careful lines the earth still keeps. The first ruin you enter has walls that lean in just a whisper, doorways narrowing toward the top, windows shaped like trapezoids that make the horizon look framed and slightly more important than usual. A mainstream fact slots gently into place. Inca architecture habitually used inward-tilting walls and trapezoidal openings to increase stability in earthquakes, a practical grammar that helped whole towns flex instead of fail when the ground remembered to move. You run a fingertip along a jamb and feel the way edges have been softened by time, like a sentence smoothed by retelling. A wide terrace steps down the slope, its retaining wall studded with small stones that look like punctuation. At the edge, a narrow channel hugs the ground, turning at right angles so neatly you want to applaud. Water management, yes, but also choreography, coaxing a thin ribbon to dance exactly where the terrace needed it. You picture a worker with a gourd ladle testing the flow, nodding once and calling it a day. If only your shower drain shared the same sense of duty. Beyond the terrace, an open rectangle stretches longer than the others, the footprint of a great hall, a kalanka, where gatherings, storage, or the kindly chaos of logistics likely lived. You stand in the center and clap once. The sound arrives, considers its options, then leaves politely. In your mind, you layer on people, runners arriving with knots of news on quipu cords, cooks issuing bowls of thick stew, a foreman counting everything twice because that's how you keep stone and stomachs on schedule. The wind threads through imaginary rafters and writes a line of music for the scene. Upslope, a stepped platform rises, a low, square prominence with a top just high enough to gather attention. An ushnu, perhaps, a ceremonial stage, part calendar, part podium, part compass point. The corners still know where to look. You climb the steps and let the plateau spread under you. Wall, terraces, paths braided into the hillside like quiet instructions. It's easy to imagine how rituals here would talk to the land, libations poured into a small stone cup, offerings placed so the mountain could overhear. You resist the urge to make a speech to the lamas. They are notorious critics. On the far side, a string of small round bases climbs like a necklace toward a ridge. Storehouses, kolkas, once stood here, their cool interiors keeping surplus grain, dried potatoes, and salted meat ready for seasons when the mountain asked harder questions. A second steady detail joins the first. Inca sites commonly ringed their settlements with colcas, positioned to catch prevailing winds and shade, a food security system braided into logistics and empire. You tap the stone rim of one base and imagine it full, storage as a gentle promise that work done now would matter later. Then, tucked between two terraces, a little doorway squats just above ankle height, leading into a room barely big enough to kneel inside. Its floor is burnished smooth, and in a corner, a thumb-sized niche waits like a patient eye. Ritual deposit, tool cubby, cozy real estate for important guinea pigs. You grin and settle on multifunctional, the archaeologist's way of saying, "It mattered, we're not sure how, and we're being polite about it." As you wander, the masonry shifts. Some walls wear the same tight-lipped polygonal grammar as the great line you touched earlier. Others slip into courses of smaller, more regular stones, still exact but different in accent, like dialects of the same language. You think about phases, work crews separated by years or rulers, each inheriting foundations and choices. A neutral voice murmurs background. At several highland complexes, evidence shows pre-Inca occupation, such as the Quilqui culture around the Cusco Basin, preceding imperial renovations. Later, Inca projects often built over, through, and alongside earlier walls when expanding sacred and strategic centers. You let the thought settle without turning it into a verdict. A boy from the village market told you a tidbit when you bought coca leaves this morning. Beneath certain plazas here, tunnels run like secret veins, linking hill to hill and spilling out in the old city below. A quirky legend, yes, but one with teeth in local memory. People speak of the Chincana, the place where one gets lost, a web of passages the old folks warn children away from. Historians still argue whether such tales preserve a literal map of lost galleries, confuse natural fissures with engineered routes, or compress many kinds of underworlds, mythic, ritual, and geological, into one story you can carry home in your pocket. You pause at a corner where the wall changes direction with the crispness of a folded page. A low bench runs along the inside face, its top polished flatter than your sense of humility. You sit. From here, the path you climbed earlier aligns with a gap in the masonry ahead, and beyond that gap the valley's river lays a bright stroke across the view. Alignment, convenience, both? The mountain refuses to submit a memo. You toy with the idea that some gaps are less doors than sightlines, openings that make the land sentences easier to read. Not far off, you catch the faint geometry of a staircase carved straight into bedrock, halfway finished, then abandoned, a pause in the sentence rather than a period. Your lamp, which you are not using but your imagination is, finds pick marks like a metronome frozen between beats. Maybe the crew shifted to another priority. Maybe a flaw showed itself. Maybe the budget meeting went sideways. Some things truly never change. A shallow basin hacked neatly into a terrace corner collects a puddle from recent rain, the water hosting a tiny galaxy of drowned gnats. You lean over, see the sky reflected, and think of offerings, cleansing, and afternoon hand-washing before work resumed. You also think, without saying it out loud, that this would make an excellent spot for a sink if the ghost of an ancient plumber ever takes contracts. Along a perimeter path, you find a scatter of small, smoothed pebbles, riverstone strangers in a landscape of hard mountain faces. Someone carried them here, perhaps for sling practice, perhaps for ritual counting, perhaps because pockets and idle time have always been friends. A line of 3 sits carefully on a ledge like a note left for later. You leave them as they are. Not every sentence wants your edit. The wind leans in, bringing a faint scent of herbs from somewhere lower, and the wall you started with peeks into view between 2 terraces, its stones shining the way dry skin shines in high light. The relationship becomes a little clearer. The wall isn't a loner. It belongs to an ensemble. Halls for people, platforms for ceremony, gardens of stone that make food and water behave. The big mystery loves its small supports, and the small supports are proud to be noticed. They wave. You wave back. You are now friends with architecture. Congratulations. When you stand to leave the Calanca footprint, a sliver of obsidian winks at your boot. Not native to this exact ridge, but not outrageous either. Trade has long arms, and toolkits mix like languages in border towns. You set the shard on a sun-warmed stone and let it be a bookmark in case the mountain decides to keep reading. One last look from the Ushnu sends you down a path that curves toward the wall again. Along the way, you pass a low doorway whose sill is worn into a shallow dip, a tally of ankles counted by stone. You step over, the dip receiving you like an old handshake, and feel the complex breathe behind you. Terraces exhaling coolness, halls saving their echoes for rainier afternoons, little rooms keeping their secrets with tidy satisfaction. Historians still argue whether this arrangement was primarily ceremonial or primarily practical, whether defense, ritual, storage, or administration held the lead. The neat trick, you think, is how the site refuses to pick one when it can be many. You reach the edge where masonry and mountain rejoin without apology. The wall tilts its brow just enough to shade your eyes. You step back into its company and feel the settlement settle inside you the way a melody does when it lands on its home note. The big stones say nothing. The little stones explain everything, if you're willing to listen at their speed. You follow the wall as it snakes upward, its stones playing a long game with the slope. Each turn feels deliberate, each angle a choice someone made centuries before you were even an idea. The air grows thinner, crisp like a sheet pulled tight, and your lungs negotiate each breath with a bit more ceremony. Below, the terraces shrink into neat lines, like the ruled pages of a giant's notebook. At a bend, you come upon a break in the masonry, a gateway of sorts. Two vertical slabs frame an opening, their faces so smooth you could almost use them as mirrors if you didn't mind looking a few hundred years into the past. Here, you get your mainstream fact of the day. Many Inca gateways were designed in trapezoidal shapes for stability and aesthetic harmony, a visual rhythm that tied the built environment to the surrounding peaks. The taper makes them feel solid, like the mountain itself is lending a shoulder. Through the gateway, the path tilts into a narrow ridge. To your left, the ground drops into a green basin. To your right, it plummets toward a scatter of boulders that look suspiciously like they have been gossiping about travelers for centuries. Somewhere far below, a stream whispers secrets in a language you only almost understand. You decide not to ask it to repeat itself. Mountain gossip can be brutal. Halfway up, a cluster of stones lies just off the path, forming what looks like the outline of a miniature corral. The walls here are only knee-high, but inside, the floor is neatly cleared of debris. You crouch and feel the urge to assign it a purpose. Was this a resting spot for llamas, a lookout for messengers, a cozy sun trap for the village's unofficial nap champion? The quirky tidbit from local lore. Some guides swear these little enclosures were used for ritual offerings to Epus, the mountain spirits, before crossing into higher, more sacred ground. They point to small carved niches where coca leaves or chicha might have been left, a token of respect before tackling the next climb. As the ridge levels, you pass a single standing stone planted in the earth like an exclamation point. It's not part of any visible wall, yet it seems perfectly aligned with a notch between two distant peaks. Historians still argue whether such solitary stones were astronomical markers, spiritual anchors, or just the result of a particularly enthusiastic stonemason who didn't like clutter. You trace the ridgeline with your eyes and feel the alignment hum in your bones. Whether intentional or coincidence, it's doing its job. Up ahead, the path widens into a flat platform, edged with waist-high stonework. From here, the view is almost absurd. Valleys spilling away in every direction, mountains layered like the folds of an endless quilt, clouds sliding between peaks as though the sky is practicing its dance steps. A trio of hawks circles in the distance, their shadows racing the wind across the slopes. One dips lower, just enough to make you wonder if it's checking your snack inventory. You spot a depression at the center of the platform, round, smooth, and shallow, like the world's oldest bird bath. When it rains, water must collect here, reflecting the sky. You picture someone centuries ago kneeling over it, watching the sun or moon float on the surface, waiting for the right moment to begin a ceremony. Or maybe they just needed a quick drink. Even the sacred have to hydrate. Moving on, you encounter a narrow stair carved directly into bedrock, each step just irregular enough to remind you this wasn't built for comfort, it was built for function and intention. The stones are worn, their edges softened into gentle arcs by thousands of feet. You descend carefully, the wall to your right now a constant companion, its massive blocks catching light in shifting tones, gold here, silver gray there, as if the mountain is testing out outfits. At the bottom of the stair, a small ledge juts out from the wall. On it sits a perfectly round stone, balanced so precisely it seems to be posing for an art exhibit. Nobody moves it because everyone agrees, without saying so, that some things should stay exactly where they've been for hundreds of years. You give it a small nod, the kind you offer to someone who's been standing guard longer than anyone can remember. The path curves again, tucking you into the shadow of the wall. Here, the temperature drops a few degrees, and the scent shifts to something deeper: earth, lichen, and the faint mineral tang of stone sweating in the shade. You run your palm along the blocks, feeling the dips and ridges like braille for a story you're still learning to read. At the far end of this shaded stretch, you step into sunlight again. Ahead, the wall meets a cliff, bending around it like an arm slung over a friend's shoulder. Below the drop, the valley unfurls in slow motion. You lean against the stone and watch a pair of clouds merge into one, deciding that even in the Andes, some meetings are worth the climb. The wall leads you into a new mood, one where the horizon is suddenly wider, the sky suddenly louder with wind. The path skirts the edge of a shoulder of the mountain, and below, the valley is a mosaic of greens and browns, fields and scrub stitched together like someone couldn't decide on one fabric. The sun throws long slants of light that catch on the stonework, making the lichen glow like tiny lanterns. You notice the masonry here is different. Blocks that were once so tight now show hairline gaps where roots have threaded through. It's a reminder that even the best-built walls eventually have to make peace with plants. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. In many highland structures, the Incas used a technique called ashlar masonry, shaping stones to fit so precisely that they needed no mortar. Even centuries later, earthquakes often left these walls intact while newer buildings crumbled. You run your fingers along the seams, marveling at their stubborn alignment. But then there's a strange addition, a protrusion in the wall shaped like a narrow shelf. It's too small to sit on, too high to be a handhold. Local gossip labels these message ledges, where runners between villages could leave small items, bundles of herbs, knotted quipu cords, or the occasional love note, assuming the recipient could climb. The quirky part: some believe these were also strategic snack stations because, let's be honest, everyone needs trail mix. Past the ledge, the path narrows into a causeway that hugs the slope so tightly you could brush one hand against stone and the other against thin air. To your right, the drop is steep enough to make your shadow hesitate. You focus on the wall, its blocks stacked in gentle waves that mimic the mountain's contours. It's almost like the builders didn't just measure with ropes, they measured with the rhythm of the land. Halfway across, you come upon a rock outcrop with a single carved groove running diagonally across its face. It's shallow, barely the width of your thumb, but it points directly toward a distant peak, now glowing under the afternoon light. Historians still argue whether such grooves were part of a surveying system, an astronomical calendar, or simply the ancient equivalent of X marks the spot. You trace it, imagining the hand that cut it, wondering if they had any idea you'd be here, centuries later, trying to decode their geometry. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of wild mint from somewhere up the slope. It's refreshing enough to make you forget, briefly, that your calves have started filing complaints. You pause at a bend where the wall meets a small platform jutting outward like a balcony. The view is ridiculous, mountains stacked in layers of blue haze, the valley floor so far below it feels like another country. Somewhere, a condor glides past, its shadow so vast it swallows you for a heartbeat. You wave at it because politeness costs nothing. The stonework here includes a recessed niche, perfectly rectangular, about the height of your chest. You lean in, and for a moment, the wind dies. Inside, the air is still and cool. Perhaps it once held a ceremonial object, or a water jar, or, if you let your imagination off the leash, the ancient equivalent of a do not disturb sign. The wall curves upward again, this time toward a series of low terraces. The steps between them are uneven, forcing you into a slow, deliberate rhythm. The sound of your boots against stone becomes metronomic, almost meditative, and the climb stops feeling like effort. At the top, you find a flat space with another standing stone, taller than you and narrower than it should be stable. It leans ever so slightly toward the valley, as if eavesdropping on whatever the wind has to say. You stand there a while, letting the view and the silence have their moment. Then, almost without thinking, you press your palm to the stone. It's warm from the sun, but beneath that, it holds a deeper heat, the kind that comes from being rooted in the earth for centuries. You imagine all the hands before yours, touching, pausing, and moving on. The wall continues beyond this point, but for now, you let it wait. You step back into the wall's shadow, and the wind gentles, as if stone tells air to use its indoor voice. The temperature drops a notch, sounds tighten, your boot scuffs, and the little scrape seems to travel along the blocks like a bead along a wire. You try it again, scuff, pause, and the wall returns a thinner twin of your sound a heartbeat later. It's not eerie so much as attentive, like the mountain is practicing active listening. You pick a spot where the masonry bulges ever so slightly, a soft convex curve that catches the light like the hull of a ship. You face it and give a single clap. The response is immediate, not a canyon's long howl, but a quick bloom, a palm-sized echo that flowers and closes in the space of a breath. You clap again, softer. The wall answers softer still, as if it's matching your energy. A very polite party guest. A mainstream fact fits neatly into the moment. Large Inca plazas and terraces often behave acoustically like controlled courtyards, with hard stone faces reflecting sound efficiently. Even without mortar, the tight joints and angled walls can focus or diffuse voices, useful for coordinating labor or addressing groups. You picture a foreman standing near this very curve, calling cadence to haulers, the short echoes keeping time better than any drum. You also picture your own high school gym echo, and for once the gym looks underqualified. You shift left and clap again. This time, the echo skews to your right, as if it bounced along a diagonal seam. You test with a low hum, sliding the note up and down until the air seems to catch at a pitch you feel more than hear. The stone hums back, faint and tight like a string tuned to mountain. Closer to the corner, a narrow recess rises to your chest, trapezoidal and deep. You step into it and speak a word, any word, and the sound returns with a tiny shimmer, brighter than before. The geometry does the trick. Walls that lean in a hair, a ceiling edge that skims your voice and folds it back. You try a short phrase, and the niche gives it a little polish, the way a good microphone does for nervous singers. You consider releasing an album called Greatest Hits for One Listener. Probably a small market, but the reviews would be kind. A pair of swallows flits past, cutting soft arcs over the parapet. Their calls tug the air into thin threads, and you notice how the wall trims the edges. Each chirp gets an outline. You wonder whether a ceremonial speaker could make 100 people feel like a whisper was meant for each of them, or whether the stone simply turned daily instructions, lift, push, brace, into something that traveled reliably without shouting. You try stamping your heel, once, twice. The second stamp arrives with a brief doubled tick, as if one echo sprinted to catch up with the other. You walk 5 paces, stamp again, and the double splits wider. The surface modulation, those subtle curves and facets in the blocks, acts like a scatter plate, giving certain frequencies a little runway. You're not measuring with instruments, you're measuring with shoulders and skin. Still, the pattern is there, a quiet choreography between sound and surface. A local tale from the market floats back. On certain festivals, an elder can stand at a particular stone and sing a line that reaches the terrace above without strain, as if the wall secretly hands the note up the steps. A quirky tidbit, maybe, but easy to believe when your own voice seems to go farther than your breath should allow. Historians still argue whether these acoustic effects were deliberate features, calibrated with tests and adjustments, or happy byproducts of structural choices made for stability and style. You leave the recess and walk toward a shallow bend where 2 faces meet. There, the seam creates a long, low V, the kind of angle carpenters love and wind respects. You face the joint and whistle a simple shape, 2 notes, a third apart. The return comes as a faint chimed answer, the interval cleaner than it has any right to be in open air. You try not to get carried away and whistle an entire mountain opera. The alpacas would judge. Downslope, the terrace lip is squared with a short parapet. You set your back to it and speak toward the wall in a conversational tone. The words come back softened but intelligible, the edges surviving the journey. You imagine a runner relaying news on a quipu day, knots counted, names checked, while the stone tidies the vowels. Stone is an excellent editor, cuts the fluff, keeps the sense. You experiment with distance, stepping out 3, 6, then 10 paces. At 10, the return diffuses, picking up a hint of the valley's breath. You turn your head and hear the echo slide along the masonry like a quicksilver line, looking for somewhere to land. When it finds a corner, it brightens. When it meets a curve, it smooths out and lowers its voice. You start to hear the wall less as an object and more as a set of decisions. A herder moves on a path far below, 2 dogs orbiting her like small moons. You call a greeting, a simple, lifted syllable, and the sound carries cleanly over the distance, more than you expect for this thin air. The herder looks up, lifts a hand, and the dogs chorus their opinion, which is consistently, everything is important. You grin, you have fans. You press your ear to a cool block and tap gently with a knuckle. The note is short and dull, solid core. You tap 3 courses higher, the note lengthens slightly, as if the cavity behind is larger or the block lighter. You're not diagnosing a building so much as listening to its pulse. Doctor, it hurts when I earthquake. Good news, you flex. At a higher platform, you find a short stair with unusually wide treads, each one gently pitched toward the wall. You walk it slowly and speak a number on each step. Here, the echoes stack in a neat little cadence, countable, almost like an abacus made of air. It's tempting to invent a ritual, recitations that only lock when set at the right pace in the right place. But you file it under satisfying coincidence will leave unsolved, next to how the socks disappear in a house with no dryer. You can't help thinking of other stone places with famous echoes, arenas that send a shout around like a traveling flame, temples where a clap becomes a bird call in stories told far from here. You keep your comparisons gentle. Every culture sets its own rules for how sound should behave in sacred and working spaces. The Andes teach with wind and height. The lesson here is compact, practical, friendly to the voice. You return to the first curve and sing a single low vowel, then step sideways while holding the note. The resonance swells, dips, and returns like a tide, not dramatic, but sure. Your face relaxes, your chest unlocks. It's the kind of response that calms people long before they know why. Predictable feedback, soft boundaries, a room without a roof. One more test. You face the valley and clap. The open world gives you a long, messy echo, all scatter and sparkle. You turn 90 degrees and clap at the wall. The echo shrinks to something you can use, short, crisp, countable. The difference is the point. Out there is weather. In here is work. The light cools toward evening, and the stone picks up the sky's first purples. You slip a hand along the seam one last time and let a simple thank you go with your breath. The wall returns a breath-sized yes. Whether that's physics or kindness, you decide it can be both. Historians still argue whether features like these were tuned on purpose or discovered by trying and keeping what worked. Either way, your ears are convinced. A good wall lifts more than weight. It lifts a voice without asking for applause. Wind fingers the grass at your ankles. Somewhere, water talks in a small silver voice. You shoulder your pack and step out of the shadow, carrying 2 new tools forward, a rhythm for your feet and a pitch the mountain seems to prefer. Not bad returns for a handful of claps and a little patience. Also, free concert, no ticket line. You keep moving along the wall's base, where the slope bends away and the ground opens into a shallow saddle between ridges. The air here feels thinner, not because you've climbed higher, but because the space swallows your breath before it settles. Grass leans in soft patches, and boulders sit like dropped breadcrumbs leading toward a cluster of strange stones half buried in the soil. From a distance, they look like chunks that fell from the main wall and simply gave up on the idea of returning home. Up close, you see the same flawless joints, the same angles that make a mason's square jealous. But here, the blocks are lying flat, almost like tiles in a forgotten courtyard. Moss trails along their edges as if tracing the map of an ancient room. One block in particular draws you in. It's as tall as your waist and shaped like a perfect trapezoid. The top surface is smooth enough to skim your palm without catching, and at its center is a faint hollow no bigger than a coin. You touch it, expecting a sharp edge, but the dip is soft, deliberate. A mainstream fact slips into place. Many Inca and pre-Inca builders left shallow depressions in stones, not as decoration, but to help in lifting and maneuvering them with ropes and levers. This one, though, seems oddly central, as if it had a second purpose. You drop into a crouch and sight along the hollow toward the main wall. From this angle, the depression points exactly at a specific seam, like a sightline in stone. Coincidence? Maybe. But your brain files it under, this would be a great way to set up the world's most patient laser pointer. Kneeling here, you notice something else. The arrangement of these scattered stones is anything but random. Even without mortar holding them in place, they sit in a loose but deliberate arc, their edges angled so they catch the afternoon sun and cast a line of shadows toward the ridge's far side. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. A local guide once joked that this place was an Inca chessboard where the pieces were too heavy to move, so the game took generations. You're not entirely sure he was joking. You stand and follow the arc. Each block offers a slightly different texture, some with tool marks so faint they could pass for natural veins, others with flat planes that seem too precise to be weather's work. A few have small L-shaped notches carved near their corners. Historians still argue whether those notches were functional, perhaps to join wood beams, or symbolic, marking the stone's identity in a construction puzzle. The further you go, the more the ground changes underfoot. It's softer here, more loam than gravel, and in it you find slivers of pottery no bigger than your fingernail. The glaze is gone, the clay sun-brittle, but the curve tells you these once belonged to bowls or jars. You pocket one, then put it back. There's something fitting about leaving it where it's been waiting for centuries, especially when the nearest recycling bin is, 500 years late. At the far end of the arc, a low stone platform rises just high enough to give you a better view. From here, the wall is a clean slash of shadow, the terraces beyond stacked like sleeping steps. The scattered stones behind you align toward the setting sun, and for a moment you wonder if they served as a kind of seasonal marker, each shadow creeping toward the wall on certain days until it touched a specific seam. The thought isn't far-fetched. In many ancient Andean sites, builders aligned structures to solar events with startling precision. You cup your hands and call toward the wall. The reply is faint, swallowed by the open space, nothing like the tight echoes you heard earlier. This place is meant for looking, not listening. You can almost imagine a group gathering here at dusk, watching the last light slide down the face of the wall, each shadow marking a passage of time too large for a single lifetime. On the platform's edge, a groove runs fingertip deep across one corner, angled just so. You slide your hand along it and find it points toward a gap in the ridge beyond. Maybe it's a drainage channel, maybe it's a pointer, maybe it's an ancient version of X marks the spot, though you're not holding a treasure map, just the stubborn curiosity of someone who finds grooves suspicious. You step down and walk the perimeter one more time, noting how the grass thins near certain stones and thickens near others. The earth here is full of small rises and dips, like something once lay beneath and has long since collapsed. A shallow depression near the center catches rainwater in a perfect oval. You kneel, scoop a palmful, and sip. It's cool, metallic, and tastes like it's been waiting for an audience. The light shifts, the first gold creeping into the blue. You glance from the scattered stones to the great wall and back again, tracing lines in your mind, lines of sight, lines of shadow, lines of intent. Whether these blocks were part of an earlier construction, a ceremonial marker, or just leftovers too pretty to discard, they still talk to the wall in their own silent way. And as you turn to head back toward the main structure, the wind slips between the stones, making a low hum that follows you like a note you can't quite place. Not a warning, not an invitation, just a reminder that even scattered pieces still belong to the same story. You leave the arc of scattered stones behind and follow the slope as it curves back toward the wall's midsection. The ground dips here, funneling you toward a shallow ravine lined with scrub bushes and wiry grass. It's the kind of spot you'd skip over if you weren't paying attention, until you notice the glint of something pale wedged between the roots of a stunted tree. It's a block, not just any block, but one so different in color and texture that it feels like it wandered here from another world. While the wall's built mostly from dark, volcanic andesite, this stone is pale, almost chalky, with tiny quartz veins shimmering under the sunlight. You run your fingers over its surface, and it feels warmer than the surrounding air, as if it's been storing sunlight for centuries. The first fact rises to mind. Archaeologists have confirmed that some of the megalithic structures in Peru were built using stones quarried dozens of miles away, sometimes from sources on the other side of rivers and ridges. Transporting them without wheels or modern machinery would have been a colossal task. Yet here it sits, far from its quarry, as if placed deliberately in the earth's crease. You glance toward the wall and trace the imaginary route back to where this stone could have fit. Its angles match the masonry style, but the color would have stood out sharply among the darker blocks. That could be the point. A quirky tidbit floats up. Local legends talk of sentinel stones, unique in color or shape, meant to act as spiritual anchors or guardians. The villagers will tell you with a half-smile that removing such a stone invites the mountain to come looking for it. You can't help but picture that, an entire ridge uprooting itself and waddling downhill just to reclaim its missing piece. Not the most practical threat, but probably enough to keep ancient children from pocketing sacred rocks. As you wander further into the ravine, you find more out-of-place stones, one with a greenish tint, another speckled with white flecks like frozen rain. Each is partly buried, as if the earth slowly pulled them into its chest. You crouch and tap one with your knuckles, solid, resonant, like knocking on a door that no one's opened for centuries. Historians still argue whether these foreign stones were purely functional, chosen for their hardness or resistance to weather, or symbolic, brought from specific places to connect the wall to distant landscapes. Some believe they were gifts or tributes from other communities, proof of alliances. Others think they're older than the wall itself, relics from an earlier civilization whose own structures were dismantled to supply the newer one. You imagine that process. Workers hauling ancient blocks across rugged valleys, following routes known only to them. The sound of stone on wood rollers, the groan of ropes tightening over distance, no cranes, no trucks, just sheer stubbornness and an understanding of leverage that would make modern engineers nod in respect. The ravine narrows, and the sun angles lower, filtering through the branches above. The light catches on something, a long, straight groove carved into one of the paler stones. It's barely wide enough to fit your finger, but it runs the length of the block in perfect symmetry. Functional, decorative. You lean close, tracing it, and notice faint marks on either side that look suspiciously like symbols. They're too weathered to read, more like ghosts of writing than the real thing, but they nudge at your imagination. You step back and see that several of the out-of-place stones form a rough line, almost like a trail leading toward the wall. They're spaced unevenly, but your eyes connect them instinctively. It feels deliberate, like breadcrumbs, if breadcrumbs weighed several tons and required a small army to move. By the time you emerge from the ravine, you're directly in front of a section of the wall where the color shifts abruptly. A patch of pale stones interrupts the dark facade, not randomly, but in a vertical stripe that climbs from the base all the way to the top. Standing there, you feel as though the stripe is a frozen waterfall of lightstone, pouring upward instead of down. You press your palm against the pale stripe and notice it's slightly warmer than the darker blocks beside it. Could be the material, could be the way it catches sunlight, or maybe it's your imagination turning geology into mystery. Either way, it feels like you've found the missing siblings of the stones in the ravine. The stripe hums with quiet presence, and for a moment, the breeze dies, as if the air itself is holding its breath. You step back, letting your eyes wander from this stripe to the scattered pale stones behind you, and then up to the jagged silhouette of the ridge. The connection feels unshakable, even if you can't name its purpose. Somewhere between practicality and ceremony, between transport logistics and spiritual design, the answer lingers. And as the wind picks up again, rustling the bushes at your back, you can almost hear the stones settling into their long, patient watch. You stand in front of the pale stripe and feel the tug of war begin, the one between what's written on signs and what whispers from stone. A breeze combs the grass, tidy as a librarian, while your mind pulls books off the shelf and leaves them open on the floor. The wall doesn't move, but it has a way of making you pace. A mainstream anchor keeps you steady. The city of Cusco and its surrounding complexes, including grand walls like Sacsayhuaman, are widely accepted as Inca works from the 15th and early 16th centuries, consolidated under rulers such as Pachacuti and his successors. Chronicles from the Spanish conquest describe Inca engineering with a mix of awe and opportunism, and the empire's reach at its height is not in question. That's the textbook's spine, strong, useful, and not going anywhere. But as you trace the stripe with your eyes, you realize the book has footnotes that keep clearing their throats. The first one waits right under your boots. You can't radiocarbon date a block of stone. Without mortar to trap ancient twigs or straw, dating relies on context, artifacts in adjacent deposits, ceramics in fill, tool marks compared to other sites, and the occasional lucky layer of charcoal in a construction trench. It's like trying to guess someone's birthday from their shoe size. Possible, but you'll never be invited to surprise parties. You squat and sift a hand through the scree at the base. A few pottery crumbs wink, sun-brittle and anonymous. If a lab could talk, it would say, "Give me organic residue," or "Give me patience." You stand again, dusting your palms, and think about how timelines in the Andes are sometimes braided, older foundations, newer veneers, pre-Inca layouts given Inca clothing. In the Cusco Basin, archaeologists recognize cultures predating imperial rule, the Quilque, for instance, whose occupation and construction likely set the stage that the Incas later redecorated and expanded. That's not scandal, that's urban renewal with better stone. You take a slow walk along the wall, noticing transitions, coarser courses moving into meticulous puzzle work, then back again. It reads like multiple crews with different training, or multiple eras swapping tools. A nearby guide earlier today shrugged and said, "You can tell who had coffee." Not an official dating technique, but compelling. Historians still argue whether these shifts mark distinct construction phases decades apart, renovations after earthquakes, or simply stylistic preferences within a single period. About those earthquakes, you lay a palm to the stone and remember the region's long tremor diary. Major quakes rolled through in colonial centuries, toppling many Spanish buildings while the polygonal walls sat down, adjusted their shoulders, and kept working. Aftershocks, repairs were necessary, sometimes by people with different masonry habits and different access to quarries. A fissure here, a replaced course there, little stitches you can spot if you squint. The wall becomes a palimpsest, the same sentence written, erased, and written again, always saying, "Stand." You circle back to the pale stripe. If you were a dating method, you'd be annoyed by it. Look at me, geology, shouting in a library. The stone choice could be practical, harder, better in weather, or symbolic, material from a place with ritual juice. A quirky rumor clings to the ridge. Some say a ruler ordered a lightning path of bright stone to mark a ceremonial route, a kind of stone banner you could see from the terraces below, part calendar, part "we're open" sign. Others insist it's simply a supply story, that quarry delivered lighter blocks during a frantic construction push. Use what you've got, make it fit. Historians still argue whether color bands like this should be read as intentional messages or the inevitable collage of long-term building in a complicated landscape. You find a small patch of lichen, like tiny gold fireworks, and catch yourself thinking about lichenometry, the attempt to estimate age by lichen size. You gently laugh it off. Up here, microclimates play favorites: sun, shade, wind, and the moods of condors treat one face differently from the next. Lichens can whisper old, but they struggle with precise birthdays. If you tried to publish a date off them, a committee of botanists would materialize and kindly escort you to a long seminar. A few steps away, a seam ends in a trim little ledge where a block juts just a thumb's breadth. You lean on it and pull out the mental map you've been sketching since the morning: pre-Inca routes, imperial overbuild, possible post-quake patches, and then a sprinkling of later interventions when stones were borrowed for colonial houses and sometimes returned in different shapes. The record in some places notes Spaniards dismantling parts of walls for churches and mansions. It also preserves their admiration for what was too massive to move. Some contradictions in dating melt when you accept that walls aren't one-time events, they're careers. Still, a stubborn question paces at your feet. Some stones around Cusco look older than the rest, not in years you can measure, but in the way the skin of the blocks has weathered, in how certain joints carry a different handwriting. Fringe storytellers make a meal of this. They talk of a civilization before the Incas, with techniques the empire inherited but couldn't fully replicate. Plant acids to soften rock, sonic tools to coax blocks into place, star maps carved into seams, ideas that feast on wonder and starve on evidence. You let the stories hover without inviting them to dinner. Imagination deserves a seat near the table, not at its head. You sit on a low step and reframe the problem. Maybe the dating jitters are less about hidden empires and more about how hard it is to timestamp something that's both art and infrastructure. Stonework that functions gets repaired invisibly. Stonework that impresses gets copied by students for decades. If the Inca masons inherited a few foundation lines from earlier builders, of course their own crews tuned and amplified them. Great workshops don't throw away good patterns. They add harmony and change keys. A gust lifts grit and lays it against your boots with a papery hiss. The valley blinks in sun. You think of chronicles, their biases, their praise, their blind spots. Some Spanish writers credited the Incas unequivocally. Others reported folk memories of earlier hands. Oral histories braid with politics. The empire, after all, had its own interest in claiming the best stones as its own. Historians still argue whether contradictions in early accounts reflect genuine mixed origins or the way memory edits itself under new management. You drift back to the pale stripe and set your forehead lightly to the cool stone. The wall gives you exactly one answer. It is here. You can measure angles, trace tool marks, read stratigraphy at its feet, compare it to cousins on neighboring hills, and argue politely in thin air. You can also admit what the Andes teach in every direction. The time up here is not a straight line but a terraced slope. People build, people rebuild, people remember, and the mountain nods when the fit is good. A hawk knits the sky above you, sewing blue to blue. You consider, not for the first time, how tempting it is to crave a single date, a single name, a single stamp on a single form. Then you look at the joints, curved, angular, generous, and accept a more Andes-shaped answer. This wall holds multiple moments at once. The empire's flourish, the prelude of earlier neighbors, the aftercare of quake-savvy hands, the stripe of pale stone, signal or supply line, threading through all of it. You step back, count 3 breaths, and smile at your own impatience. The official story isn't broken. It's just written on a medium that edits slowly. If there's a crack, it's a constructive one, an expansion joint that keeps curiosity from tearing the whole thing apart. The wall has room for debate. It invites it even with that quiet builder's humor. Measure again. You oblige, because what else can you do? Before you move on, you pat the stone like a friend's shoulder. Thanks for the conversation. Sorry for the fingerprints. Somewhere downslope a dog barks, a runner shouts, a pot lid clinks in a house you can't see. Life continues its usual argument with altitude. You shoulder your pack and walk along the stripe until it vanishes into darker courses, not satisfied, but satisfied enough to keep going. Mystery is a good traveling companion. It never naps on your shoulder and drools. Dusk slides in like a soft blanket, and you decide not to leave. You settle on a flattish stone near the pale stripe, pull your jacket closer, and let the last color drain from the valley. The wall cools under your palm, shedding the day in a steady exhale. Wind drops to murmurs, grass quiets. Even the occasional dog downslope gives up on opinions. For once, the mountain keeps its thoughts in a whisper, and you get to listen. The first star arrives early, a precise pinprick above the highest ridge. Then another, then so many that the sky feels perforated. The wall changes personality in this light. The puzzle joints you traced at noon blur into a single gentle plane, and the pale stripe turns into a vertical ghost. Less stone, more suggestion. You try a clap, just once, because curiosity doesn't wear a watch. The echo is softer than before, rounder, as if night smooths even sound's sharp edges. You clap again, lighter, and the wall replies like a friend saying, "Shh, neighbors." Cold climbs your sleeves. You pull out a small snack, because philosophizing on an empty stomach is a health hazard, and consider the big, slow churn of this place after sunset. A mainstream fact steadies your night vision. Inca ritual calendars tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, and Andean skywatchers recognized dark cloud constellations, formed not by stars but by the inky patches of the Milky Way, shapes like the Yacana, the celestial llama, which appears when the river of the sky is most brilliant. You tilt back and find the Milky Way's frosted arc, thick enough to make you feel you could scoop a handful. The llama is there if you let your eyes soften. It helps to imagine it chewing. Somewhere behind you, a stone clicks as it cools, just a tiny tick, the day's heat stepping away. You feel an urge to answer with your own click, like you're practicing Morse code with geology. You resist. The mountain has better things to do than decode your punctuation. Moonrise sneaks in like a shy guest. Its silver edge rides up behind a notch, spills across the ridge, and then unfurls over the wall in a slow, confident pour. The pale stripe lights first. For a minute, it looks like a standing waterfall, bright enough to earn a gasp you don't bother to swallow. The rest of the face brightens in gradients, seams tipping their hands as fine shadows. If the masonry were a sleeping animal, this would be the moment it opens one eye to see who arrived. You breathe deeper, slower, and allow your thoughts to thin to the kind the night permits. Not answers, just shapes. A chorus of small sounds keeps time, distant water riffles, a moth tapping your sleeve, a high, curious chirp you hope is a bird and not a tiny night committee auditing your campsite. You hum a few notes under your breath, and the wall returns them with a faint, glassy halo. You imagine a foreman centuries ago, using this same gentle echo to call the last crew in. No shouting, just the stone signing off the day. From downslope, a thread of music reaches you. Somebody's radio, tinny and brave, stubbornly trying to be a star among stars. The melody bumps into the masonry and gets tidied. You can't make out the song, but you like the idea of it climbing the wall and turning around to find its way home. You raise a hand and give the night a tiny conductor's cue as a joke. The wind declines to follow, which is fair. You nibble another bite of your snack, offer a crumb to the concept of reciprocity, then realize there are no birds to bribe and withdraw the offer gracefully. A quirky tidbit nudges in. Some fringe accounts claim that certain walls in the Andes were timed to sing most clearly at specific lunar angles, implying a hidden calendar in acoustics. Ritual nights when a chant fit the stones like a key in a lock. It's a gorgeous idea, rich with poetry, and about as slippery as moonlight when you reach for data. Historians still argue whether the audible changes you notice after dark are clever calibration or just the predictable behavior of cool air and stone geometry doing their evening shift. Your eyes adjust as the moon climbs. The valley below turns into a gentle gradient, terraces dissolving into layers of charcoal. Far off, a chain of village lights strings the darkness, careful as beads on a cord. You think of messengers on the old roads, chasqui running relay through the night with messages encoded in knots, steps measured by breath and distance. You are not running anywhere, and your heart thanks you. Breath smokes now. You wrap your scarf higher. You decide on an experiment of patience, no sound for a full minute. The silence grows bigger when you stop feeding it. Then, wait, a soft scrabble. You tilt your head, ready to make friends with a nocturnal neighbor. A small shape darts along the base, mouse probably, busy with a schedule you do not need to understand. You give it the courtesy of not narrating its errands, though you are tempted to award it Employee of the Month. It disappears. The wall, as usual, declines to applaud. You stand and stretch, vertebrae quietly voting for warmer lodgings. You pace along the pale stripe, counting steps just to see what number your feet like at night. 12 feels right. You stop there and rest your forehead against the cool stone. The temperature is a kind of truth. Day hands the wall to night, and night hands it back when the sun returns. Somewhere in that exchange is the reason these joints hold so long. Expansion and contraction rehearsed a 1,000-year duet until even earthquakes became part of the choreography. You whisper a question you don't expect an answer to. Who first stood guard here after dark, counting stars instead of stones? A shepherd, a mason, a priest in training banned from jokes for a week. You try not to invent them too specifically. Sometimes respect means letting the silhouettes stay silhouettes. If you listen hard, you can hear what long labor sounds like when it rests. Not silence, exactly. More like a low, satisfied hum underneath everything else. The moon gets high and the wall turns softer again, silver upon silver. You think about the competing explanations for what you've seen. The textbook's confidence, the footnotes' polite coughs, the legend's beautiful audacity. If you stack them like stones, each shapes the next, and the whole thing stands only because the joints are honest about where they meet. You prefer the versions that leave room for hands and patience. Skill is a good ghost to believe in. It asks for imitation, not worship. A breeze returns from the high pass, tasting of ice and time. You try one last clap. It comes back thin and neat. "Good night," says the wall. "Good night," you answer, and consider heading down to friendlier temperatures. Instead, you sit again and let the cold be part of the story. You're not here to defeat the night. You're here to share it. You tuck your hands in your sleeves and watch the pale stripe dim as a cloud walks over the moon. Darkness swells, then drains. Time behaves like water here. Minutes don't tick, they pool and flow. You could stay until dawn, and the wall would behave as if you'd never left, which is not an insult. It is the freedom a long-lived thing gives you. Come and go. I will be here. Historians still argue whether places like this are best read as defenses, sanctuaries, calendars, or stage sets for empire. The moon offers no vote. It just keeps the page lit while you read. You inhale the cold once, twice, and rise. Your knees complain politely. You take a last, slow walk past the seam that earlier caught your eye, past the niche that brightened your voice, past a little ledge now busy hosting a silent ribbon of frost. Just before you turn away, you lay your palm on the stone. The wall feels exactly like what it is, patient, exact, and gently indifferent. That indifference is a kind of generosity. It means your questions can live here without wearing out their welcome. You step back, let your eyes collect the sky and the ridge and the unwavering line of masonry, and file the night into the part of your memory that doesn't need polishing. When you finally move, the sound of your footsteps folds neatly into the air. No flourish, no echo that asks to be chased. Just the small, clean punctuation of a watcher finishing a sentence. Morning starts without ceremony, just a slow thinning of the dark. You stir on your stone seat, stiffness convincing you to stand. Breath plumes in the cool air as the first light works its way down the ridge, catching the highest stones of the wall before touching anything else. That pale stripe you traced yesterday glows again, not like last night's silver spill, but with the warm push of sunlight. It looks less like a ghost and more like the backbone of the whole structure. You walk closer, palms grazing the surface, noting how the texture shifts where sun meets shadow. The joints seem to tighten under light, the angles sharper. Downslope, the valley reappears, terraces and paths filling in with color. Somewhere a rooster takes responsibility for the dawn. The wall stands exactly as it did when you left it last night, except now it feels awake. You clap once, habit, and the echo is brisk, direct, as if it's had coffee. A practical fact slides in with the light. Inca builders didn't use mortar. Instead, they shaped stones so precisely that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them. Each block was carved with multiple angles on its faces like a three-dimensional puzzle piece, locking it into the surrounding stones in all directions. This not only held them together, but also made the walls resistant to earthquakes, a fact you find even more impressive when your own hands, after a few seconds of tracing, can't guess how they managed the symmetry by eye and hand alone. As you step back to take in the whole length, a pair of children appears on the lower path, walking to school with the easy rhythm of people who know every dip in the trail. One spots you and waves. You wave back, feeling absurdly official, like you've been the night guard on duty. They disappear behind a fold in the hill. The wall absorbs the moment without comment. You decide to follow its line further than you did yesterday. Each turn offers some slight variation, a bulge in the base, a recessed niche, a stone that catches light in a way its neighbors don't. Some sections have a polish that hints at centuries of hands brushing by. Others are rough, almost shy. You try to imagine the original builders deciding where to put each distinctive stone. Was it planned for beauty or function? Both? You suspect the answer is yes to more questions than not. Halfway along, you find a corner where the wall makes a clean angle, blocks wrapping around as if they'd grown that way. Standing in the crook, you clap again, and the sound doesn't echo so much as fold inward, wrapping you for a half second in a neat sonic blanket. You think of messengers pausing here, perhaps resting a load or catching breath, the sound, a small reminder that the structure was aware of them. A cloud drifts across the sun and the wall shifts tone again, warm ochre replaced by flat gray. It's like watching a mood swing in slow motion. You lean into the cool shadow, enjoying how the temperature drops instantly. The Andean wind carries up the smell of damp earth, and somewhere below, a dog barks in 3 short bursts. You answer with a whistle, and the bark stops. Mystery solved or game over, you can't tell. Walking further, you recall another bit of archaeological context. Certain walls like this may have marked processional routes, places where ritual movement was as important as the destination. Pilgrims, dignitaries, or entire communities might have walked past these stones in measured pace, carrying offerings or symbols, their footsteps echoing differently at each bend. You imagine the sound of sandals on packed earth, the soft chime of metal ornaments, and the way the wall would have been both silent witness and perfect amplifier for the moment. Eventually, you find yourself back where you began, the morning now full, the valley humming with work and movement. The pale stripe is bright, but no longer the center of attention. The whole wall is awake, its length holding the sun like a long, warm breath. You take one last look, pressing the sight into memory, and turn toward the path down, the sound of your steps folding neatly into the day. By the time you reach the lower terraces again, the day has ripened into that mid-morning sweetness, air warm enough to loosen your shoulders, but still carrying a cool thread from the high peaks. The wall is now above you, tracing its deliberate line along the ridge, and from this angle, it seems less like a barrier and more like a ribbon pressed into the hillside. You tilt your head, following it until it disappears behind a slope, and for a moment you imagine it never ends, just keeps going until it circles the entire range like a stone belt. You decide to take the shepherd's path that skirts the base of the wall. Down here, the stones feel larger, more imposing, almost as if they're leaning slightly toward you. The lower blocks are massive, some taller than you, and the gaps between them are so tight that even the roots of the stubborn little grasses can't wedge their way in. A lizard darts out from a crack, stops to give you a quick side-eye, then zips away like it just remembered it left the stove on. Here's your mainstream fact for the walk. Some Inca and pre-Inca walls were deliberately inclined inward, a slight trapezoidal shape that gave them extra stability in earthquakes. Combined with the precision of the stonework, this meant they could stand for centuries without mortar, shrugging off tremors that would level modern brickwork. The angle is subtle, but now that you're looking for it, you see it everywhere. Halfway along, the wall shifts character again. The lower stones become rougher, less uniform, almost as if a different set of hands took over the work. Archaeologists still argue whether this indicates repairs in later centuries, or if it's simply a section where form followed the natural shape of available stone. You run your hand along one of these rough blocks and feel the uneven ridges, like an unfinished thought, frozen mid-sentence. And then, the quirky bit of lore. Some local guides insist certain walls hum faintly when the wind is right. You pause, leaning your ear against the stone, nothing at first but the muffled thrum of your own blood. Then, just as you're about to give up, a gust slides past, and for half a heartbeat, you think you hear a low note, like a single string plucked on an enormous instrument. It might be wind, it might be your imagination. Either way, it makes you smile. The path narrows, forcing you to walk single file, even though you're the only one here. Grass brushes against your knees, and a few wildflowers lean out like they're curious about your business. Up ahead, a natural spring seeps from the hillside, its trickle cutting across the path. The water runs clear and cold. You crouch to cup some in your hands, letting it spill through your fingers. The stones nearest the spring are slick with moss, their color deepened to a dark emerald that makes the rest of the wall's gray seem almost silver. It's here that you notice something odd, a single stone set slightly askew, unlike its disciplined neighbors. Its tilt is so deliberate it feels like a wink. You wonder if it was a marker, a joke, or a mistake, so well hidden the builders decided to keep it. You can't help but grin. Even in perfection, humans leave fingerprints. When you finally step back onto the main trail, the wall is once again above and ahead, patient as ever. The sun is higher now, shadows shorter, the world settling into its workday. You glance back once before moving on, and in that moment, the wall almost looks like it's following you, not moving, just watching. You decide to do the unglamorous heroic thing. Walk the wall from end to end, no shortcuts, no excuses, just you and the stones keeping pace. The first stretch rises gently, the blocks tall and self-assured, surfaces smoothed into the kind of subtle curves that make sunlight behave. Your breath finds a rhythm, 4 steps in, 4 steps out, and the wall seems to match you with its own slow metronome. In some places, the joints look like rivers on a map. In others, they're sharp, almost technical, as if a draftsman drew them and the mountain signed off. A small spur of masonry branches downhill, a low companion wall that runs for maybe 20 paces and then melts into grass. You follow it and find the stones are smaller, knuckly, and stacked in even courses. A mainstream fact tucks itself into your pocket. Inca builders often mix styles within one complex, polygonal mortarless puzzlework for monumental faces and more regular coursed masonry for domestic or secondary structures, matching effort to purpose. You tap a block with your knuckle. The sound is firm, modest, and unbothered by applause. Not every stone wants to be a celebrity. Back at the main line, a tight corner turns like a well-folded page, and the texture changes again. Here the faces bear shallow tooling, parallel strokes overlapping like combed hair. You run your palm along them, feeling the faint striations. A light joke taps your tongue. This wall has better grooming than you do after a week of travel. You accept the truth and carry on. The route begins to climb. Steps are carved into bedrock beside the wall, low risers, long treads, the staircase equivalent of a friendly mentor. Between steps, occasional sockets appear at knee height, shallow recesses, neat as if made by a cautious thumb. For lifting beams, for staging a scaffold. A shepherd passing below once told you they're pause points, places to rest a load and a thought at the same time. You like that. It feels like architecture being kind. At a high terrace, the wall's personality brightens. The stones bulge outward in gentle bellies, seams sweeping and interlocking in S-curves. You clap. The echo replies with a quick, tidy nod, as if to say, yes, the acoustics committee met here and took minutes. A niche holds cool shadow. You lean in and smell stone the way you smell rain before it happens. Your breath fogs the face and vanishes. The wall keeps no souvenirs it doesn't choose. Beyond the terrace, something playful surfaces, a few blocks that carry small bosses, rounded nubs left proud of the face. You've seen them before in quarries and transport scenes, but here they seem retained on purpose. A quirky tidbit sidles in. Some interpret these as lifting points never fully knocked away, others as symbolic builders' signatures, or even as tactile guides in low light. You give one a very respectful boop. The mountain pretends not to notice. The middle section steadies into long, nearly level runs. You settle into cruise mode and start to notice micro-choices. A tiny bevel on an otherwise flat edge, a seam that bends just enough to dodge a pebble-like inclusion, a course that subtly thickens where the slope steepens, like a belt tightened by one notch. Historians still argue whether such variations encode a standard set of rules passed through guilds, or whether every crew grew its own grammar around shared principles, local dialects with a common root. The evidence feels fluent either way. A condor drafts the ridge and throws your shadow into an awkward tango. You grin at the thought of asking it for a ride to the far end. The bird declines your rideshare request with majestic silence. Fine. Legs it is. Where the wall negotiates a shallow gully, the base swells. Larger blocks, deeper set like boots stepping into mud. Above them, smaller stones take over, as if the design acknowledges that water lives here and must be courted rather than scolded. A little chute peels off, a drain to usher flash rain safely away. You trace it with a fingertip, mentally filing it under good manners. If houses had this level of courtesy, umbrellas would be a niche hobby. Past the gully, the masonry tightens again into that showpiece polygonal style, each block a personality. One stone looks like a bent trapezoid wearing a cape. Another narrows to a coy point, meeting its neighbor like two hands clasped. You catch yourself anthropomorphizing and decide it's allowed. When craft feels this human, calling it by human names is a compliment. The wall dips toward a saddle where the ground opens, and here the face grows simpler. Tidy courses, modest joints, fewer flourishes. You imagine the logistics meeting. Long stretch ahead, conserve the fancy cuts for the corners and gateways. Sensible. Your feet approve, your knees write a thank you note. At a small gateway, trapezoidal and clean, the jambs carry faint polish. Thousands of hands, maybe more. You stand in the threshold and let the wind run through, a gentle funnel. Behind the jamb, a thin groove rises along one block, barely there, but straight as a promise. Sightline, plaster guide. You try aligning it with the notch between two far peaks. It clicks so satisfyingly you consider holding a small award ceremony. You settle for a quiet, nice. Now the far half. Fewer visitors reach this end, and the wall seems to relax. Lichens bloom in saffron freckles, roots press inquisitively at lower joints and get nowhere. A fallen branch has wedged itself against a ledge like a bookmark the forest forgot to remove. You step over and find a low bench built right into the base, 3 stones projecting in a patient row. You sit. The view edits itself, wall to left, valley to right, sky doing its interminable sky business. You snack with the solemnity of a tiny ritual and share a crumb with the air. The air, being a professional, accepts but does not gush. Further on, a patch looks like a patch. Blocks just a shade off in color and finish, the fit good but not musical. Post-quake repair, perhaps. The mountain tutored someone in humility here, and they answered with neat stitches. You run your hand across new into old and feel where the beat picks up again. It's like listening to a band after the drummer swaps sticks, a hair different, still in time. A dog barks and emerges from scrub, delighted that you exist. You offer a hand. It offers a quick inspection and then escorts you 30 paces like an official. At a bend, it peels off, job complete. You thank your temporary supervisor and file an excellent performance review in your head. Near the terminus, the wall thins, steps down, and finally softens into a scatter where stone yields to open slope. No grand finale, just a measured diminuendo. You stand where the last true seam breathes into rock and grass. The end is tidy, almost shy. It feels right that the wall doesn't slam a door. It sets a threshold and trusts the mountain to keep the rest. You turn and look back along the entire run you've walked. Even from here, you can pick out the personalities, the show-off curves, the plain-spoken stretches, the corners that conduct, the drains that negotiate, the gateways that do geometry for breakfast. The variety isn't noise, it's orchestration. Different sections solving different problems with the same quiet confidence. One mainstream fact circles back with a bow. The Incas coordinated vast labor forces through a state system of corvée service, mitad, directing skilled crews to where they were needed most. Specialization made consistency possible across distances and altitudes that would exhaust a lesser bureaucracy. Still, you can't shake the sense that some craft choices predate any empire's paperwork. The techniques wandered these ridges before officials did, perfected by practice and carried in hands rather than decrees. Whether that's romance or history, the joint stands either way. Historians still argue whether the most refined polygonal work represents imperial zenith, local master schools, or layers of renovation stacked like time-lapse stone. On your walk back, you let yourself touch the wall exactly 3 more times, small greetings to sections that made you slow down. At one of them, you whisper a thank you. At another, you promise to remember. At the last, you say nothing because silence seems correct. Then you step away, and the line holds steady behind you as if it had walked you instead, escorted you through its lessons, and let you go when you were ready. For a structure that shouldn't exist, it's very good at letting things move. The trail back into the village feels like stepping out of a long, unbroken conversation, one where the other speaker was mostly stone, and you were mostly listening. Your legs carry the echo of its rhythm. Your fingertips still recall the chill and grain of each surface you touched. Somewhere in your chest, The slow patience of those walls has lodged itself like a seed. You have no idea what it will grow into, but you suspect it will live a long time. At the edge of the settlement, the line between ancient and present blurs in plain sight. A garden wall borrows blocks from an Inca ruin, their faces smoothed by centuries, set alongside rougher modern stones. A grandmother tends herbs behind it, her hands working the soil in motions older than the empire that once ruled here. You pause, realizing that the act of building, whether with granite or with seeds, is a kind of quiet defiance against forgetting. Children dart past, chasing a worn rubber ball that smacks against the corner of a colonial-era church. The impact leaves no mark, but the sound ricochets between old and older, brick and stone, as if reminding you that time doesn't just move forward. It loops, bounces, doubles back. The church itself sits on a platform of unmistakable polygonal masonry, its stones whispering a subtext the Spanish builders probably never intended to keep. A historian once told you, "In the Andes, conquerors built on the bones of the conquered, but the bones outlasted the conquerors." Standing here, you feel the truth in that down to your souls. You wander into the small plaza where an old man sells roasted corn from a cart. His prices are handwritten on a scrap of cardboard, balanced on one of those smooth ancient stones. You buy a cob, partly for hunger, partly because it feels right to exchange something with a place like this. The kernels are sweet and smoky. The salt sticks to your lips. You think about how the walls you've walked were never just defensive lines or ceremonial backdrops. They were the edges of lived spaces, the silent partners in daily life. By the fountain, you overhear two guides debating the wall's origins for a pair of wide-eyed travelers. One insists it's pure Inca genius, the other hints at something older, some unnamed civilization that laid the groundwork. Their voices weave fact, speculation, and pride into something almost like poetry. You don't join the debate. You've learned that the walls reveal themselves differently to every listener. What you've heard today is yours, not to win an argument, but to carry. As dusk slides in, the air cools and the sky leans toward indigo. Lamps flicker on in narrow streets, their light pooling on cobblestones that have known more footsteps than any chronicle could hold. You take a slow route back toward your lodging, deliberately tracing the perimeter of the village until you find one last section of ancient wall. Quiet, unlit, overlooked. You place your hand against it, palm to stone, as if to sign your name in a language without ink. In that stillness, the wall gives nothing away and everything at once. You realize the real marvel isn't that it exists against the odds. It's that it continues to work, holding not just the earth in place, but the shape of memory. You step away, and in the soft dark, the village closes gently around you. The line of stone fades from sight, but not from your map of the world. You know you'll walk it again someday, not to solve it, but to be in its company. Some structures are worth revisiting simply because they remind you that permanence, when it exists, is built one deliberate joint at a time. The night has settled fully now, and the village around the wall is wrapped in a hush that feels older than the stars above it. You're still carrying the slow rhythm of the day, the steady weight of stone under your hands, the quiet confidence of a structure that has outlived empires and arguments alike. The air is cooler, softer, and with every breath, the scent of wood smoke and earth drifts deeper into your senses. You let your thoughts loosen. They wander back over every step, each corner turned, each weathered surface examined, each fleeting smile from someone who has lived beside the wall long enough to stop wondering how it came to be. You realize that the story here isn't about answers. It's about the spaces where the questions have been worn smooth, the way footsteps wear a path in grass until it becomes part of the land. Even now the wall is still working, not just as a physical thing holding its ground, but as a bridge between moments, a reminder that some things are made to endure. And maybe that's why it feels so comforting to stand here at the edge of history. You don't have to carry the whole mystery, just your part of it. The sky above is vast, scattered with stars that once shone on the same stones you touched today. You breathe a little slower, let your shoulders drop, and feel the cool air fill you. The wall will still be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and long after your footprints fade. So you let the weight of the mystery drift away with the night air, leaving only a calm, steady hum in its place, the kind that stays with you long after the story ends. The end. Sweet dreams.